We're going to transition now into a discussion about county priorities. And is there someone designated who's going to cue that up, or you want to just?
I'll start. So this is a request by
Thank you.
originally Commissioner Savas, but also commissioners agreed to have a conversation about kind of what are the high-standing, high-level priorities for the county to help you as a budget committee as you're making deliberations on the budget. And then the commissioners agreed to have that conversation today with the full budget committee. We've included in one of your emails the county strategic plan, managing for results, the county as a whole strategic plan. Each department has a strategic business plan that sort of aligns with the county-wide strategic plan that the commissioners created. Also, there was a document on priorities that were just from the county website the staff put together based on knowledge of the commissioners' priorities. It is missing one, I'll tell you, and that's the Sunrise Corridor System. That should have been on that list, and it was inadvertently left off. But that in addition to the other kind of one-pager priority list. So just a free-flowing conversation. Maybe Commissioner Savas would like to kick it off, just to help you guide your discussions this week on what are the countywide priorities, and do you see that reflected in the budgets that are brought before you?
Okay, well,
And will we see that reflected in each department, how that fits in with that?
It should be.
And,
Yeah.
and is there any difference between the county's priorities and what's actually in Performance Clackamas?
So the performance Clackamas, everything should be aligned. I believe it is, based on how I've gone through the budgets. Obviously, the budgets are presented now. And I do believe that the priorities are outlined in department budgets, but that's up for you to determine if you feel that's the case. Or certainly you're giving direction today. We want to make sure these programs and priorities are funded. I believe they are, but if you feel they're not, then that's a conversation we have as we go through these deliberations.
And Commissioner Humberston has his card up, but he's not here, so is there someone else who?
There he is.
Okay. No.
Chance,
so,
buddy.
yeah, so was that, do you want me to kick that off, Gary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
And I'll
please.
wait for Commissioner Humberston. The chair is recognized. Commissioner Humberston.
Okay, thank you.
I will be brief. Currently, some of our Budget Committee members don't have this packet, so I've asked staff to make sure that they get a copy of this packet.
Yeah, I think somebody's making copies.
And maybe that's happening
Yeah.
now.
I think we all read it online, but it really helps to have it right in front of us.
I didn't read it online because I hate to have to read that stuff online, frankly. I just had one question on the BCC priorities. I know that we have made a commitment to Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge, and Gladstone regarding libraries. And that's not on here, and I'm not sure if it's that high on the list as a priority or not. I'll defer to Mr. Schmidt on that, but I thought that should be at least introduced into the discussion.
If I may, so again, this was not a document the board approved. Staff distilled this based on
Understand.
reading all this information you do. So it's simply, we couldn't list everything, but of course libraries are a priority, as is the Sunrise System, so.
Because we made a commitment to those communities, very specifically in the process of resolving the legal dispute. So it's one
And
of
the
those
budget
things.
reflects that, if
So
I
I just want
recall.
to be sure
Yeah.
that's noted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Savas, were
Yeah.
you prepared to?
Yeah, actually,
have some just
actually I
legal
am. I
discussion?
am. Thank you. So I wanted to, for those on the Budget Committee who are not aware of this, last week or the week before, I actually raised the question that the idea that maybe my colleagues would talk about our priorities, not really budget priorities, but our most immediate priorities looking ahead in the next 12 months. And then somehow convey to you all, the Budget Committee, what those things are. And Commissioner Humberson touched on one of those, which is on my list, which is libraries. And the reason being is that how that may affect our our demands on our resources. So just to roll back, and I really again appreciate Commissioner Humberson broaching the library matter. As you may know or have read, we had a big issue with the city of Gladstone in a lawsuit. And we had an agreement with the city of Gladstone, which we signed. And basically, it obligates a method in which we build 2 libraries. My issue at the time was a good agreement. My issue at the time, however, was that there wasn't enough resources, and that the price per square foot in which that formula was based on was not, at that time, I felt reflective of what the market value is to actually build it. So there was a distinction and a delta. And I struggled with that, the administrator. We had some interesting conversations about that, but that's gotten worse, by the way. That's hit almost every project, every type of construction, whether it's housing, whether it's roads, whether buildings, no matter what it is, the price per square foot has shot up. So what that means is that we are obligated, to Commissioner Humberson's point, we are obligated to build the Gladstone Library, and somewhat and obligated as a sister to that to build the Oak Lodge Library. However, there's not enough resources to do that. I don't know what the number is, but I think we need to realize that that's something big that we're going to face, because the first library to be built will be Gladstone. That will be in this fiscal coming year. So that's got a resource requirement undefined at this point. Housing projects, I'm concerned about the price per square foot for some of the housing projects. Will that or will that not be able to be absorbed within the Housing Authority budget, or will that require a general fund contribution? Don't know the answer, but I know that's a priority. We have a balloon payment. There's been talk about that. We have the Equal Pay Act. That is something that we don't know when that will be, but obviously it's got to be a priority for us to fund that. But we don't have that number. But banking a little bit of money aside for that would be a wise idea for us. There's been some over expenditures in some departments, and I guess the question is those align with our priorities? And I guess as we go through all of that, that my goal for having this was to at least have myself and my colleagues on the commission ourselves discuss what the priorities might be in the year forward that we would want to make sure we are budgeting for, that are not actually embedded in or allowed for or accommodated for in the budget. So broad discussion, but that's why Gary accommodated the time, and that's what the board decided to do, is to bring that all to you for this discussion today. So voila, here we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you. When you're talking about zero-based budgeting, and I almost would use the term priority-based budgeting, I don't know if that's the same, going to get you the same result as what you're thinking. But focusing on what the values are that you've set at a high level for the county. And I thought I saw a document at some point, probably online, talking about things like, I want a safe community, I want opportunity, I want, a thriving economy, that level of thinking that then should inform decisions you make going forward through your new budgeting process about where your priorities really are. And that's, with the exceptions of the things that you're legally obligated or financially obligated at this point to do, but keep your focus on those higher level goals for the county is going to help you prioritize these program requests going forward. So I just didn't know if the discussion was getting us down into the weeds where maybe we should be thinking at a higher level at this point.
Okay. Others? Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Sean, about the higher level, because in this packet with the performance clackamas, and you're right, we have growing a vibrant economy, building a strong infrastructure, ensuring safe, healthy, and secure communities, and honoring and utilizing our resources. The BCC priority list is very high level, because within each of those, I can speak for securing healthy communities. We have suicide prevention is a very strong goal. We have a goal of reducing children in foster care, which means although we don't provide foster care, we provide a lot of the support services through our programs that do that. And so within each of those are a whole list of priorities that our departments are very, very keen on addressing, which as we go through the process and we see our outcome measures, we will dig into the weeds. But I really appreciate that look at a high level, because most of our work, as far as where we're going as a county, is done with that very strategic thinking that was done before Commissioner Humberston and I even got here. Yeah.
Commissioner Bernard?
Yeah, and I think that's true that we're pretty high level. I can say that the sunrise is a priority. we can't fund that ourselves. It's gonna require the passage of a T-2020 bill. But we can focus, when we sell a piece of property that we purchased through with road funds, that money go back into buying up property, which would be our share. I think libraries, I thought we had committed to 5 million for Gladstone. Pretty sure we did.
That's in the budget.
And as far as the Oak Grove Jennings Lodge, I hope that people will take the time to look at the economy and make those investments when it's cheaper. I mean, you could have done some wonderful things back when the economy was really slow had you had the money to do it. So if the economy is so high right now that we can't possibly find a builder who can build it at an efficient rate. By the way, I had an opportunity to visit Northwest Housing, and their pricing on their project is quite reasonable, under 200,000 a square foot. So there is
I mean,
some
$200 a square foot.
$200 a square foot.
I'm like, wait a minute, it doesn't compute.
Great project. They did a lot of planning on, aligning the sewer pipes, the quality of the material, which is very high, use, the kitchens, everything. But we also want to not invest we want to invest our money in a way that provides a mixed income housing opportunity. The other thing that I have wanted to do for years and would be we're going to be talking about this soon, is internet access for all citizens in Clackamas County. Don't necessarily want to compete with folks like Comcast, but we also, Comcast has not provided services where often services are needed. So this creation of a utility, which can be a profit-making enterprise over time. It requires a lot of investment at first. The other thing is focus our spending on equity zones. So we often spend money I'm not going to say haphazardly, but in areas throughout the county, and we don't invest in areas where there's the greatest opportunity to make a difference. And we need to do that. And then also, I guess this is kind of a focus on our grant funding in equity zones also. I started this, it was my idea a few years ago to start it. My goal is actually to take a lot of the nonprofits that we do fund and put them all in the grant process, which would probably require $1 million grant program. But there are some, like Paul said, that, for example, Children's Services, the Children's Center, which we could not provide the same service that they provide at what we give them. So, and it's also true with Clackamas Women's Services. It's also true with employee, what's that called? Workforce investment.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of those that we could not possibly do with the money we give them. And finally, invest in housing to reduce homelessness. And that's going to require our planning department to look at different ways to invest, focusing our investment where transit and services are local and available. And when we look at the future of the Sunrise Project, our partnership with Happy Valley, there is a huge opportunity to create a jobs housing balance that out in Happy Valley and Carver and that area, where we can really do something not only to protect the environment, but also to provide a balance of housing and jobs. Over 60% of our citizens leave the county to go to work. we've been talking about this for 100 years. Let's figure out how we can give the opportunity for people to live and work in their community rather than driving to another county to get a job, to go to work. And my ultimate goal, and I used to say this in Milwaukee, is that my goal is to have people come to us to go to work, not leave the county to go to work. So people from Multnomah and Washington County come to Clackamas County for work. I think that project in Canby, the Columbia Distributing, will do exactly that. But hopefully folks who live there will buy houses in Canby area in the future so they don't have to drive that distance. So that's mine.
Thank you. And with your discussion about jobs and jobs housing balance, I know there's a lot of focus right now on the McLaughlin corridor, but it's not listed here anywhere. Is that another one that
It
might
is. So
be
in
a
the
priority
in
for
the
the?
T2020, there is opportunity to study McLaughlin, and we are studying McLaughlin because there's an opportunity to create jobs on McLaughlin so that people don't have to leave the county. And that's one thing that we're studying in another process, and something that eventually I think the 2020 process will take a look at how you could do that. And our planning department looking at how you could zone it to make it attractive to development.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I know that's one of it is the priority this year for the Economic Development Commission, County's Economic Development Commission, so I appreciate that. Commissioner Schrader?
And I just wanted to add to what Jim said, particularly with planning, our land use, sometimes policies and procedures have not caught up. One of the priorities has been, obviously, that's been ongoing and should continue to move forward, is as we revamp and get our codes up to speed. There are so many changes at the
You mean like
state level.
updating your comprehensive
Updating, because
plan?
one of the detriments, I'll be meeting, for example, this week with a constituent who wants to do a distillery, but the planning codes and things won't allow him to necessarily locate in an area where what we just talked about with corridor revitalization, that would be potentially a nice fit. So there's those kinds of priorities that we really need to do within our departments so we can allow some of this to move forward, because we're a little bit too stuck in the 20th century. And
So is that a timing issue, or is it a financial issue, or, or
It's largely not just being allowed to do
Just
it,
being-
because of the
yeah.
way our land use codes are written right now, and how we change that and how we move forward with something like that is going to be
right? And of course, updating a code is
development, yeah.
a very lengthy
It has been
process,
ongoing, but I guess what I'm saying
depends
is
on-
it continues to be, in my mind, a priority.
Yeah.
Also, let's mention ongoing priorities are the legacy project, that I think that we're going to continue to be a significant part of, as well as all the work we've done on the Willamette Fall locks
Yeah,
issue as well.
okay, thank you.
So-
Good. And Commissioner Savison, before your comment, you had mentioned in your discussion a few moments ago a balloon payment. I believe it was you who mentioned that. I'm not clear on what that's for. Could you just,
Now, that was for the light rail Orange Line payment.
I was
We had a
thinking
balloon
that's
just
what it was,
is
but I
due in
wasn't sure.
2027. I just want to, staff has indicated one particular strategy perhaps, but I just thought we ought to keep that in the, don't know what the interest rates are in the future. It's hard to
Right.
predict. So maybe it'll be attractive, maybe it won't be attractive. So, but putting away a little bit of money to augment or offset that would be maybe a wise move perhaps. I did have my card. I just want to just
Yes.
respond to Commissioner Bernard's comments on Sunrise, most of which I agree with. But what I do want to say, just backing up, is that the more priorities you have, the less priority you have. Or the other way to say it is that, you lose a lot. Where really less is more. So what I do want to say about the Sunrise, one other opportunity there is because there's so much greenfield, because there are so many acres by far than any other area we have to be developed, that will add assessed value, that will augment our general fund. That's, for us, I think that's the most relative thing that will be beneficial for us, is that if you look at the benefit and the opportunity there, not just the jobs and not just the housing, but there are some extra advantages that nowhere else offers. So I think that focusing would be better, and limiting that to the greatest opportunity, especially in light of what we're facing in years ahead. This is not just about today or this fiscal year coming. It's about us setting a path for fiscal years to come, and put ourselves on a sustainable path. But right now, we're being outpaced. The challenge we face, we've been facing since I've been here 8 years, is that expenditures, cost increases are outpacing revenues, and that is just a mathematical recipe for, a fiscal dilemma that we got to resolve.
Thank you. I have a question to pose to basically the BCC, I guess. I've heard discussion in the past off and on about perhaps initiating a business license fee. There isn't one currently in the county. I wondered about that and about what other counties do. I don't know what's typical and usual throughout the state, but I've heard that off and on, and I wonder if that's something that's,
Oh, we could arrange a report. Work was done on a business license fee, discussion about what department that would be in. But the argument is, what value is it to the business?
yeah.
And that's what we really need to do. And I think we could probably arrange for Mary Jo to give
We
a,
actually have a policy session scheduled on this in June or July to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
so maybe a brief white paper or something on that issue would be good.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Commissioner Bernard,
So
you
I
had your card.
totally forgot, I had another list. One of our priorities, a big one, is courthouse.
Yeah, that's,
So the courthouse
number
provide, justice really, and a great need. Our courthouse is falling into the river. We are working to figure out how we're gonna fund it. We have scheduled a work session on different types of funding opportunities or options, and that is high on our list of priorities. The other is children's levy, a consideration of how are we gonna fund, if we could do like you guys did with the extension service and 4-H and libraries, put a measure out. You can put a measure out that would reduce the demand on the general fund to fund those services, and a children's levy. There is a group working on it. All those groups are folks we fund through the general fund or through some departmental budgets like H3S and juvenile services and all those. So that's another thing that it's a priority for me to figure out how to fund those and take the burden off the back of the general fund.
okay,
Which is
great.
a burden I'm happy to have. Because like Paul said, a lot of those folks provide services we could
That you
never.
couldn't, granted, yeah. Yeah, it's far more economical to have someone else do it that's their bailiwick, so to speak.
So point of order, Chair. Just for organizational purposes and the purpose of this particular session we've carved out, I see some of our staff have taken notes. I just want to know where we are, how we conclude, what we have, I'm sure if there's any other comments, we ought to take those. But, in the year coming, is this a topic about ideally the priorities we have for this budget?
Right, and
From a
how's your
fiscal standpoint.
budget helping you get to the goals of,
And I don't know which staff
those
members
priorities.
taking the lead on outlining those, but are there any clarifying questions from staff or so forth, so we know that we actually get a product from this little session we've just spent time on?
So you have 5 staff members taking diligent notes on everything you are all saying, and this is being recorded. So are you expecting a priority list back now for the purpose of the budget you're discussing, or is this to guide you for next the 2020 fiscal year budget?
personally, I would think that since this budget's already set, and what we want to do as we go through it with the departments, in my opinion, is to see how it fits with performance clackamas and the basic priorities. But if I understand correctly, knowing what the priorities of the board are going forward, then it helps formulate the budget for the next year. The purpose of a budget is to carry forth the goals of a municipality, county, cities, whatever. And so if it's not been stated, it's not going to be in the budget. So making sure that those two things align. And also, I think it was Commissioner Savas who mentioned the large number of priorities. It often is better to have a smaller stated set of goals or priorities, whichever you want to call them, and make sure that you have the funding for those first and foremost, and then move on to the secondary ones if there be that, type of thing. So it would seem to me that it helps form next year's budget, which you're going to start working on July 1, 2019, right?
Yes.
Your thoughts on that, Commissioner?
Well, yeah, yes. But your earlier comment, I was listening, you mentioned that the budget is set, and
Well, not set.
yeah, I want to get clarity because, and I've talked to the administrator, and he's nodding because he knows exactly what I'm going to say right now, and that is, are we or are we really not simply going to approve this budget as presented? And if so, I don't see a lot of use in us having a whole lot of time on budget presentation, or are we going to apply some of these priorities and make some adjustments? And last year, and the years prior, I think we've kind of had, not to my liking per se, but we've simply approved and went through days and days of working together here, listening to all that, and we changed very little. So knowing that this is really more of a crisis year than ever, is there acceptance of this group to actually have less presentation and do more work, or just simply approve it as it's presented?
Commissioner Bernard.
Well, I have no intention of blowing the budget up and making everyone go back and refigure things. But budget presentations are very important, and I anticipate there will be some adjustments, but we can't take a $12 million shortfall and figure it out. I mean, that's not our job. We hire professional people who, in various departments, do a really good job of figuring out how to spend their money. And I have no intention of blowing the budget up and starting all over. I think the idea this year is a Band-Aid. I think we heard a Band-Aid. And I'm willing to accept the fact that these folks have worked really hard to get us through this with the goal of really getting deeper into it in the following years. And I think that's where the budget committee, Citizen Budget Committee, is going to be very, very important in determining the future investments that the county makes.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Feely?
Well, as a citizen member, I certainly view this budget as, well, we could call it a Band-Aid. It's a transition year, and quite frankly, having a $12 million hole doesn't leave us a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not going to propose some changes to the budget. I mean, we don't have to commit to that right now. We haven't even heard from people. But wholesale changes with a giant sort of ongoing hole is not going to be very productive. And I would just add to that, I think it's important as you go through your process next year, look at areas of budget policy and financial policy that can be codified so we don't get in this situation again. I mean, I mentioned in one of my questions the whole thought of using one-time money for ongoing programming just rubs against my budget history. But I understand that in a transition year, that's necessary, and Gary's been very clear to point out that it's a one-time shot.
Very good. Thank you so much. So we have Commissioner Humberston, and then Savas, and then Schrader. And I would ask that you keep our time frame in mind. We have other people that are scheduled to begin their presentations at about 10:15 after we take a short break. and Ms. Coldwell. Thank you.
Well, I don't disagree that there will be places where we can make some adjustments in this particular budget, but as Mr. Schmidt has pointed out, this is a transition budget, and the real work, quite frankly, I think is going to be starting on July 1st, where we really look at how we don't find ourselves in this position again. I'd also like to point out that out of $1.2 billion, roughly, total budget, about $150 million is general fund, give or take, okay? That's really where we have much to say. And of that $150 million, give or take, 45% goes to the sheriff, 10% goes to the district attorney's office, 8% goes to health, housing, and human services, and the rest is spread out amongst other departments. So when you get down to the real nitty-gritty of this, there's a very limited area where we have very direct impact on costs. So we just need to keep that in mind as we go forward, that the bulk of this budget is money that comes from either the state or the federal government for very specific siloed programs, and you can't just move it around any old place you want to. That would make things a lot easier if we could, but also probably a lot more chaotic if we could. So let's be aware of what our own limitations are in this process as we go forward. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
I just appreciate Mr. Feely and Commissioner Humberson's comments about maybe perhaps being open to adjustments. I think that's really the purpose of what we're talking about here today. And I would concur that, putting ourselves or making some adjustments where possible would be wise. Remember that, and I know there's reference to staff. Staff does work for the Board of County Commissioners. This budget committee, these staff around us work for the budget committee. So, 5 of us are elected and 5 of us are appointed, but we all have that ultimate responsibility. And remember that we make the policy. So it's kind of a chicken or egg thing to some degree. Staff makes a recommendation, which we have before us, and we set the policies and the guidelines. And I don't want to get ourselves into a pattern or continue the pattern in which brought us to this point today. And that is the $7 or $12 million miscalculation that brought us to this point today. We have to figure this out. And we have to send a clear message during this budget proceedings in the coming days to staff so that they've got some direction. Because after your work's done, typically the way we work is that the budget committee's influence from there on is not effective. It's based on the budget that was proposed and approved by June 30th by the Board of County Commissioners. So that is a policy signal and direction to all the departments and our staff. And I think that's what has to be really clear. We have to change the paradigm here. That's how we got here. And we don't change the paradigm. It's just another recipe for more inaction. I just think that to say that, $6 or $7 million of one-time funding, that's money lost. It really is. That's just a lot of money that's lost. It's not recoverable.
Thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I'm just going to reframe this in a positive way. I think actually we're on the pathway to avert crisis. That's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah. I said, I think we're on the pathway to avert a crisis. I understand the angst of the one-time money for stabilization, but the whole premise of what we're doing is to be sustainable long-term, and I am very confident in the staff that we have. I love I call them the youngins because they're the new folk. You're kind of like, yeah, you're the same age as my kids, so I mean, I can't help myself. But the job that you're doing in terms of looking at the differences in the underlying assumptions has been out of this world. So I do think we're in crisis, and I think we're going to work, Commissioner Savas, who I've always supported you because I think you're a great commissioner. But let's reframe it a little that we're going to avert crisis and just move forward. I guess it's the Pollyanna in me that wants to look at it that way, but we've actually discovered it. Our new underlying assumptions are definitely 21st century. Okay, the old model worked for a long time. That model doesn't work anymore because of the uncertainties that we face. But I think we're actually going to be going a long way to really stop you know, to make sure that we're going to be solvent with all our help. So, okay, enough of
Thank you.
Pollyanna.
Thank you.
Okay, there we
Now,
go.
good, always good to think positive. Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you. Very much in line with what you were just saying. We haven't heard whatever ideas you might already have about the process for reviewing and revamping the budget going forward. I guess I had assumed that it's going to be a very robust process involving lots of county staff and certainly their knowledge and expertise. So that's kind of the view I've got, in line with this being a transition budget and then moving forward into those more robust discussions about what the county's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, just on the line with what Commissioner Schrader was saying and what Sean Caldwell was saying, I don't look at this as necessarily a Band-Aid budget, with all due respect, Mr. Administrator. I look at it more as a bridge budget, a transition budget, so that we can then reexamine come July 1, a new way of doing things and do things differently. We are averting crisis. We are not in crisis, and it's the responsible, transparent view that we're all taking today that is going to get us to the next place.
Good point. Thank you very much. Thank you.